stranded on a lonely mountain road with her 7-year-old daughter. Claire Bennett had nowhere to go, and a storm was closing in. Then she spotted an overgrown railway spur cutting into the woods. At the end of it stood an old switchman's house, forgotten for decades. Claire went inside for one reason only, to keep her daughter safe. But hidden beneath an old cot were letters from another mother, written a lifetime before Claire ever arrived. And what those letters revealed would force Claire to confront a truth about her own life she had spent years refusing to see. Stay with us, because Claire went into that forgotten switchman's house looking for shelter. What she found there gave her something far more important, a way forward. Just 6 hours earlier, Claire Bennett had been standing in her kitchen, staring at a duffel bag on the floor. At 36, Claire had become very good at making things look normal. Family photographs lined the hallway. Lily's crayon drawings covered the fridge. The hedges were trimmed every weekend, visible from the street. This looked like a good home. But homes can keep secrets. Claire's husband had never needed to lock a door to make her feel trapped. It happened slowly. First came the questions about where she'd been. Then the passwords, the credit card statements, the friends he disapproved of, the phone calls that ran too long, the purchases that required an explanation, $15 at the pharmacy, a coffee with her coworker, a visit to her brother. Little by little, Claire learned to measure every word before she said it. She called it keeping the peace. For years, she told herself it wasn't bad enough to leave. Marriages were hard. Other people had worse problems. Lily needed both parents. Mostly, Claire believed she could carry the weight on her own. Then that morning, there was another argument. Nothing unusual. A voice rising. A cabinet door slammed too hard. Claire looked across the kitchen. Lily stood barefoot by the pantry, clutching her threadbare stuffed fox, Marmalade. The 7-year-old didn't cry. She simply lowered her eyes and went very still. Too still. Claire recognized that stillness. She'd been practicing it herself for years. The room seemed to go quiet around her. Claire looked at her daughter and understood something she'd spent years refusing to see. Lily had been watching her mother apologize for things she hadn't done, watching her check someone else's mood before she spoke, watching her make herself smaller just to keep the house calm. Claire had always told herself, I stay for Lily. But standing there that morning, a different thought arrived instead. What if staying is teaching her to become me? That was the moment Claire decided. She waited until the house went quiet, then packed only what mattered: birth certificates, medication, a change of clothes, Lily's quilt, Marmalade, and the small stash of cash she'd been quietly setting aside for months. Lily watched from the bedroom doorway. Mama. Claire turned. Should I pack my school things? The question nearly broke her. Claire looked at the small backpack hanging by Lily's bed and realized her daughter had no idea whether they were leaving for a night, a week, or forever. No, sweetheart, Claire said softly. Not today. There was no dramatic goodbye. Claire took Lily's hand, walked to the car, and drove away. Her older brother, Nathan, lived 2 states over. Months earlier, he told her, if you ever need to come, you don't have to explain anything. Just come. Claire hadn't been ready then. Now she was an hour into the drive when her phone lit up on the passenger seat. Home. Claire stared at the word. Her foot eased off the gas. For years, home had meant everything she thought she was supposed to protect. The phone kept ringing. Claire almost answered. Almost. Then she glanced in the rearview mirror. Lily was asleep under her quilt, Marmalade tucked beneath her chin. Claire let the phone ring itself out, then pressed the accelerator again. By late afternoon, the familiar suburbs had vanished behind them. Small towns gave way to switchback mountain roads, old bridges, miles of pine forest. Claire had no job waiting, no apartment of her own, no careful plan for rebuilding a life at 36. But for the first time in years, the road ahead frightened her less than the thought of turning around. Then the sky changed. Heavy clouds swallowed the ridgeline. Rain touched the windshield. Her GPS lost signal. Claire passed a weathered sign pointing toward an old timber and coal settlement she'd never heard of. The road narrowed. The trees pressed in, and the car shuddered. Claire looked at the dashboard. No, she whispered. The engine coughed again. She pressed the pedal. Nothing. The dashboard went dark. Behind her, Lily stirred. Mama. Claire stared through the rain at a road she didn't recognize. She didn't know it yet, but somewhere beyond those trees lay an abandoned rail spur, and at the end of it, a forgotten house that had once sheltered another mother, a woman who, more than half a century earlier, had faced a question Claire was only just beginning to understand. How much should a mother endure before protecting her child means walking away? For several seconds, Claire did nothing. She kept both hands on the wheel and listened to the rain drum on the roof. "Mama." Lily's voice pulled her back. Claire turned and forced a smile. "It's okay, sweetie. The car just needs a minute." She tried the ignition. A click. Nothing. Again. Another click. The silence afterward felt heavier than before. She checked her phone. No signal. Outside, the afternoon was disappearing faster than it should have. The clouds had dropped low over the ridge, turning the forest beyond the glass into layers of gray. Claire knew better than to wander without reason, but she also knew how cold a dead car could get after dark. She pulled Lily's coat from the back seat and helped her into it. "Are we walking?" "Just a little way, to find somewhere dry until the storm passes." Lily nodded as if that were explanation enough. Children sometimes trust us most when we feel least worthy of it. Claire packed 2 water bottles, a sleeve of crackers, a flashlight, an emergency blanket, and her dead phone into a backpack. She tucked Lily's quilt under the straps. Marmalade stayed in Lily's arms. When Claire opened the door, cold rain hit her face. They stepped onto the muddy shoulder. The road curved away in both directions and disappeared into the trees. No houses, no headlights, no sound of traffic, only rain. Claire took Lily's hand. "Stay close." They'd gone maybe 100 yards when Claire noticed something through the brush, a line too straight to belong to the forest. She pushed aside a wet branch. Beneath weeds and fallen leaves lay 2 rusted rails, an abandoned spur line. The wooden ties were dark with age, some nearly swallowed by earth. Ferns grew between them. Moss softened the steel. Claire remembered the faded sign for the old settlement she'd passed before the car died. Maybe the tracks had once led there, and where there had been a rail line, there might once have been buildings. Shelter. It wasn't much, but it was something. They followed the tracks. At first Lily treated it like an adventure, stepping carefully from tie to tie. Then the rain grew harder. 10 minutes became 20. Lily stopped talking. Claire felt the small hand in hers grow heavier. "Mama, I'm tired." "I know. We'll rest soon. I promise." Lily looked up at her. "Are we going to be okay?" The question landed differently now. Claire looked at her daughter's rain-soaked hair, at Marmalade's darkened ears, and thought of every promise she'd made that morning without knowing whether she could keep a single one. A safe place. A new beginning. A life where Lily never had to go quiet when someone walked into a room. Claire squeezed her hand. "Yes, sweetheart." Her voice trembled just once. "I'm going to keep you safe." They kept walking. Then Claire saw something ahead. At first just another shadow among the trees. She stopped. A roof line. She blinked rain from her eyes. There it was again. Straight edges, a chimney, walls. "Come on." She pulled Lily forward. The building slowly emerged from the woods, small, narrow, built close to the tracks. Its boards weathered almost silver with age. Vines climbed one wall. Several windows were shuttered. Part of the porch sagged toward the ground. An old railroad switchman's house. It looked as though no one had lived there in 50 years, but it was still standing. That was enough. Claire climbed the porch steps and reached for the door, then stopped. The weeds around the house grew thick, the porch buried in leaves, but the rusted latch was strangely clean, as if a hand had touched it recently. She looked back toward the tracks. Nothing. Only rain moving through the trees. Lily pressed against her side. "Mama, I'm cold." Claire looked down at her daughter. Whatever questions this place held could wait. She wrapped her fingers around the latch. "Stay behind me." The metal lifted with a soft click. The door resisted, then swung open into darkness. A smell of old timber and cold iron drifted out. Claire raised the flashlight. The beam crossed a wooden table, a narrow cot, tools hanging on the wall, and in the corner, a cast-iron stove. Claire nearly cried at the sight of it. She stepped inside and reached back for Lily. Neither of them noticed the words carved into the timber beside the stove. Not yet. Nor did Claire know that beneath one of the cots lay letters written by another mother during a winter long ago. All Claire knew, in that moment, was that for the first time since leaving home, she could close a door between her daughter and the storm. And for now, that was enough. Claire shut the door behind them. The storm didn't disappear. Rain still hammered the roof. Wind moved through the trees with a low, restless sound, and every so often a branch scraped along the outer wall. But inside, something had changed. For the first time all afternoon, Lily was out of the rain. Claire stood with one hand against the door and let herself breathe. "Is this somebody's house?" Lily whispered, "I don't think anybody lives here anymore." "How do you know?" Claire almost smiled. "I guess I don't." She raised the flashlight. The switchman's house was bigger than it had looked from outside, though still modest. A narrow table stood beneath one window. 2 bunks were built into the far wall. Rusted tools hung from square nails. An old oil lamp sat on a shelf beside a row of empty glass jars. Everything was covered in dust, but nothing was broken. That surprised her. This wasn't a place someone had fled in a hurry. It felt more like a room that had simply been closed one day and left. Claire turned toward the stove. If she could get it going, they might actually make it through the night, in some comfort. She crouched, opened the little iron door, and found old Ash inside. "Mama." Lily was pointing at the wall. "What does that say?" Claire followed her finger. Words had been carved into the timber beside the stove. She wiped away the dust. "Keep draft open in a north wind. Below it, smaller. Dry pine catches fastest." Claire stared. Someone had left instructions. Not decoration. Not initials carved by bored teenagers. Instructions. She looked around more carefully. Near the door, another line had been cut into the wood. 3 short whistles means trouble. And beside the window, never cross the trestle after heavy rain. A small chill went through Claire that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. Whoever had lived here had expected someone else to need these words someday. Maybe family. Maybe rail crews. Maybe strangers. People like them. She found a metal bucket of old dry kindling near the stove. Not much, but enough to try. From her emergency kit, she pulled a lighter. The first flame died. The second caught the edge of the pine, flickered, nearly went out. Claire remembered the carving and adjusted the draft. The fire drew upward all at once. A thin ribbon of smoke vanished into the stovepipe, and then came the soft crackle of burning wood. Claire sat back on her heels. "Oh, thank God." Lily smiled. "You did it." "No," Claire said quietly, glancing at the words on the wall. "I think somebody helped us." Within 20 minutes the room had changed. Claire hung their wet coats near the stove, wrapped Lily in the emergency blanket, and settled her on the lower bunk with crackers and water. Marmalade sat beside her, one damp ear drooping. Lily held the fox toward the fire. "He's cold too." "Then we'd better warm him up." For the first time that day, Lily laughed. It was small, barely more than a giggle, but Claire froze for half a second at the sound of it. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed it. Not the polite little laugh Lily gave adults, but this, loose, unguarded, a child laughing because nobody in the room needed her to be careful. Claire turned toward the stove, so Lily wouldn't see her eyes fill. Outside, thunder rolled through the mountains. Inside, the old switchman's house held. Later, Lily fell asleep beneath her quilt, Marmalade tucked under one arm. Claire stayed by the fire. She should have been exhausted. Instead, she felt strangely awake. Now that the danger had passed, she started noticing details she'd missed. A child's height marks carved into a doorframe, a small horseshoe nailed above the window, a faded calendar page tucked behind the table. Someone had raised children here. The thought changed the shape of the room. Claire imagined winter mornings, boots drying by the stove, a father coming home smelling of coal smoke and iron, a mother stirring supper while listening for a whistle in the distance. Ordinary lives, ordinary worries. People who once believed this little house would always be here. She ran her fingers along the edge of the lower bunk. Something shifted. She pressed again. A narrow wooden panel moved beneath the bed frame. Claire crouched. At first she thought it was just loose. Then she found a small recessed hole, a hidden drawer beneath the bunk. She glanced at Lily, still asleep. Slowly, she pulled it open. Dust lifted into the flashlight beam. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Claire's pulse quickened. She lifted it carefully onto the table. The cloth fell open around a stack of yellowed envelopes, tied with dark string. Letters. Dozens of them. The top envelope bore no stamp, only a name. Written carefully across the front, Margaret. Claire hesitated. These belonged to someone. Opening them felt almost like walking into a room without knocking. Then she noticed something else, almost invisible on the underside of the drawer. A sentence written faintly in pencil. She brought the flashlight closer. If the line closes, don't let them take the box beneath the floor. Claire read it twice. A third time. The box beneath the floor. She looked down. The boards beneath her boots were old and uneven, and one near the table had scratches along its edge, as if it had been lifted before. Her eyes went back to the letters. The storm continued outside. Lily slept only a few feet away. Claire knew she should leave the past alone. But something about the name Margaret, the height marks in the doorway, the survival instructions carved beside the stove, had started to feel strangely personal. Another mother had lived here. Another mother had kept children warm in this same room, and for reasons Claire couldn't yet understand, she had hidden something beneath the floor and left a warning behind it. Claire reached for the first letter. The paper trembled slightly in her fingers. Then, from somewhere outside, came a sound, not thunder, not wind, a sharp, metallic noise. Once, then silence. Claire went still, turning toward the door. Nothing happened. She told herself it was a branch striking the old rails. It had to be. Still, she crossed the room and checked the latch. Secure. When she returned to the table, the letter was waiting exactly where she'd left it. Claire sat down by the fire and unfolded the brittle page. As she began to read Margaret's words, she had no idea that the woman who'd written them, more than half a century earlier, had once faced a choice frighteningly close to her own, or that the mysterious box Margaret had tried so hard to protect was no longer beneath the floor. The letter began without ceremony. No grand confession, no explanation of the box. Just a date, January 9th, 1961. Claire moved closer to the stove. Margaret's handwriting was careful, though the ink had faded with time. Cold again tonight. Walter says the spur line may close if the snow keeps coming. Thomas coughed clear through breakfast, but Grace made him laugh. I suppose children can still find reasons to laugh when grown people have forgotten how. Claire stopped. She looked toward Lily, asleep beneath the quilt, marmalade against her cheek. Only an hour earlier, Lily had laughed beside this very stove. She kept reading. The letters told no extraordinary story. Notes about firewood, a leaking roof, freight schedules, children with winter colds, a husband coming home late, meals stretched thinner than they should have been. Yet between those ordinary details, Claire began to see Margaret, not as a name on an envelope, but as a woman, a mother, someone who had stood in this exact room while the wind screamed outside and wondered whether she was making the right choices for her children. Claire opened another letter, then another. Weeks passed between some of them, and slowly Margaret's words shifted. The line had grown dangerous. Men had been injured. Wages arrived late. Families were leaving the settlement. But Margaret's deepest fear wasn't poverty. It was what her children were learning from watching the adults around them endure things, simply because they'd always endured them. Then Claire found a line that made her stop breathing for a moment. Children learn what home means by watching what we are willing to accept inside it. Claire lowered the page. The fire crackled softly. For years, she had said almost the same sentence to herself whenever anyone asked why she stayed. I stay for Lily. She had believed it. Even when she stopped calling her friends. Even when she began hiding small purchases. Even when the sound of a car in the driveway could tighten something in her chest. She had told herself sacrifice was simply part of being a mother. But what if Lily had been learning the wrong lesson from that sacrifice? Claire remembered the kitchen that morning. The slammed cabinet. Lily beside the pantry. Those lowered eyes. That terrible stillness. Claire had recognized it because it belonged to her too. A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away. Another followed. I'm sorry, she whispered. Lily stirred but didn't wake. Claire crossed to the bunk and gently pulled the blanket higher around her daughter's shoulders. For the first time, She let herself consider something she'd never dared say aloud. Maybe leaving hadn't destroyed Lily's home. Maybe the home had already been broken in ways no visitor could see. And maybe walking away wasn't the moment Claire had failed her daughter. Maybe it was the first moment she had truly protected her. She returned to the table. Near the bottom of Margaret's next letter was another line. There comes a time when staying and protecting are no longer the same thing. Claire closed her eyes. She had spent the whole day believing she was running away. Away from her marriage. Away from the house. Away from the woman she'd become. But sitting inside a forgotten switchman's house, reading the words of a mother who had lived more than half a century before her, Claire began to see the road differently. She wasn't only running from something. She was carrying Lily toward something. Toward mornings without fear. Toward a room where her daughter could speak, without first checking someone's face. Toward a life Claire couldn't picture yet, but could finally believe might exist. Outside, the storm began to weaken. Claire looked around the old room, the stove, the bunks, the height marks by the doorway, the instructions carved into the timber. This house hadn't survived because it was beautiful. It had survived because someone had built it with care. Someone had thought about the people who might come after. She looked down at the remaining letters. One envelope was different. No date, no name. Across the front, Margaret had written only 4 words, "For whoever finds this." Claire's fingers rested on the envelope. Then her eyes drifted to the scratched floorboard near the table, the hidden box, the warning, the strange metallic sound she'd heard outside. For the first time that night, Claire understood that Margaret had left behind more than memories. She had left something unfinished, and somehow Claire had walked into the middle of it. Claire held the envelope for a long moment. For whoever finds this. For words, nothing more, yet somehow heavier than everything she'd read before. She carefully opened the brittle flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Margaret's handwriting was shakier here, as if written in a hurry, or with hands tired from years of work. If you are reading this, then the house has lasted longer than I expected. Claire glanced around the room. The stove glowed softly. Rain still whispered on the roof, but the violence had gone out of the storm. Maybe you came because you knew us. Maybe the railroad brought you. Or maybe you were simply in need of shelter. Claire stopped. Her eyes moved to Lily. Simply in need of shelter. It felt impossible that words written decades ago could describe this night so precisely. She kept reading. Margaret explained that the switchman's house had once served more than her own family. During hard winters, workers stranded along the line had slept on its floor. Families caught between mining camps had been given food. Once, during a blizzard, 7 people had crowded around the little stove and waited 3 days for the tracks to reopen. The house had never belonged only to them. It had been a place where people stopped long enough to survive. Then Margaret mentioned the box. There are records beneath the floor that should not disappear with the railroad. Names, photographs, pay slips, letters, proof that ordinary families lived here, worked here, raised children here. If the company closes the line, someone may come looking for them. If they do, I hope they understand that those papers belong to more than one family. Claire folded the letter carefully. Now she understood. The box wasn't treasure, not the kind people usually imagined. It was memory. She moved to the table and knelt beside the scratched board, slipping her fingers into the narrow gap. It lifted easier than she expected. Beneath it was a shallow compartment. Claire raised the flashlight. Empty. A pale rectangle remained in the dust where something had once rested. The box had been there. Someone had taken it. Claire remembered the clean door latch, the metallic sound outside. A knot tightened at her stomach. She searched the compartment again and found nothing, until her fingers brushed a wooden support beneath the floor. A second opening, smaller, almost invisible. Inside was a thin envelope wrapped in oilcloth, addressed not to a stranger but to Margaret's own children, Thomas and Grace. Claire hesitated before opening it. Margaret wrote that she didn't know what would become of the railroad or the little house beside it, but she wanted her children to remember one thing. For walls can keep out rain. A stove can keep out winter, but neither one makes a home. Claire's eyes blurred. Home should be the place where you never have to be afraid to return. Claire stopped reading. For a moment she couldn't move. All day she had been asking herself the same question. Did I do the right thing by leaving? But Margaret's words gave her a different question, a better one. She looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully. What kind of home do I want my daughter to remember? Not the address, not the furniture, not the photographs arranged carefully for guests. What would Lily remember feeling? Fear, silence, or safety? Claire lowered herself to the floor. The tears came quietly now. Not the tears of someone falling apart, but the tears of someone finally setting down something she'd carried too long. I'll do better, she whispered toward her sleeping daughter. Not, I'll make everything perfect. Not, I'll never be afraid again. Just, I'll do better. For the first time, that felt possible. Morning arrived slowly. The storm had passed, leaving the forest washed clean beneath a pale sky. Claire packed Margaret's letters carefully into a waterproof sleeve in her backpack. She left everything else exactly where she'd found it. Before waking Lily, she stood by the stove and touched the carved instructions one last time. Someone had written those words for a stranger they'd never meet. Someone had prepared this house for a future they'd never see. And somehow Claire and Lily had become part of that future. She'd arrived believing she'd lost her home. Now she understood she'd been given something more important, a chance to decide what the next one would feel like. She woke Lily, helped her into her coat, and opened the door. Cold morning air rushed in. Ready? Claire asked. Lily took her hand. Ready. They stepped onto the old rails and started back toward the road. They'd walked less than a quarter mile when Claire suddenly stopped. Pressed deep into the wet earth beside the tracks were footprints, large, fresh, heading in the opposite direction, back toward the switchman's house. Claire stopped so abruptly that Lily nearly walked into her. Mama. Claire didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the prints, too clear to be old. Deep heel marks in the softened mud, the edges still sharp. A man's boots, she guessed, or at least someone much larger than her. The trail continued past them, back the way they'd come. Lily's fingers tightened around hers. Are those ours? No, sweetheart. Lily looked back. So did Claire. The tracks disappeared between dripping trees. Nothing moved. No voices, no footsteps. Only water falling from branches. Then Claire noticed something near the rail. A crushed aluminum can, modern, bright beneath the mud. It hadn't been there for decades. Someone had walked this line recently. Maybe yesterday. Maybe that morning. Claire thought of the clean latch on the switchman's house. The missing box beneath the floor. The metallic sound in the night. For a moment, every instinct told her to go back. She wanted answers. Who had taken the box? Were the photographs safe? Had someone been outside while she and Lily slept? She took one step toward the house, then stopped. Mama. Lily's voice was small. Claire looked down. Her daughter was watching her face, waiting. Claire knew that look. She'd worn it herself for years, studying another person's expression before deciding whether she was safe. And suddenly she understood what this moment was really asking of her. Not whether she could solve a mystery, whether she could trust herself. Claire had spent years second-guessing her own instincts. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I misread it. Maybe it isn't that bad. Maybe I should wait for more proof. There was always another reason not to act. But Margaret's words came back to her. There comes a time when staying and protecting are no longer the same thing. Claire looked once more toward the switchman's house, then turned away. Nothing we need to worry about right now, she said, adjusting Lily's backpack. Keep holding my hand. And they walked. Claire never learned who had made those footprints in that moment, or whether the person was dangerous. She only knew that Lily was cold, their food was low, and safety was somewhere ahead. For once, that was enough. They walked nearly an hour. The abandoned line seemed longer in daylight. Lily began dragging her feet, and Claire carried her for part of the way. One arm under her daughter's legs, the other steadying against the slick ties. At 36, Claire wasn't old, but exhaustion has a way of adding years all at once. Her shoulders burned. Her wet boots rubbed at her heels. Still, every time she thought she couldn't carry Lily another step, she remembered the little girl standing barefoot by the pantry. And she kept going. Eventually the rails curved toward the road. Claire saw her car first, then something better, a pickup truck. An older man in a canvas jacket stood beside it, examining her stalled vehicle. Claire nearly cried. He looked up. Ma'am, this your car? Claire nodded. My daughter and I got stranded. He glanced at Lily, then at the dark clouds retreating over the ridge. You two spend the night out here. Claire looked back toward the trees. Something like that. He drove them to a gas station several miles down the mountain, where Claire finally found a signal. Her phone came alive at once. Missed calls, messages, notifications stacking up. She stared at the screen. For a few seconds, the old fear returned, the urge to explain, to apologize, to make everything calm again. Then another name appeared, Nathan. Claire called her brother. He answered before the first ring finished. Claire, where are you? She tried to speak. Nothing came out. Claire, where are you? That was when her voice finally broke. I left. Silence on the other end. Not judgment, not surprise. Just a breath. Then Nathan said the words Claire needed more than she knew. Okay, tell me where you are. I'm coming. Claire closed her eyes. No questions. No lecture. No demand for an explanation. Just I'm coming. Lily leaned against her side. Claire wrapped an arm around her. For years she had confused control with concern, and silence with peace. Now, sitting beneath the fluorescent lights of a roadside gas station with mud on her boots and almost nothing to her name, Claire felt something different. Help that asked for nothing in return. It felt almost unfamiliar. That evening, after Lily was safe at Nathan's house and asleep in a clean bed, Claire laid Margaret's letters out on the kitchen table. She could have put them in a drawer. She could have told herself the Switchman's house was someone else's problem. But Claire had spent enough of her life looking away from things, because facing them felt hard. Not anymore. She found the number for the County Historical Society and made the call. When a woman answered, Claire took a breath. My name is Claire Bennett, she said. I found something near an old rail line. She looked at Margaret's letters. I think someone's been trying to preserve it for a very long time. She paused. And I think it's time somebody listened. 3 days later, Claire stood beside the abandoned line again. This time she wasn't alone. A county historian named Grant Ellis walked ahead of her with a camera and a field notebook. Behind him came 2 preservation volunteers and a retired railroad engineer who'd spent most of the drive talking about branch lines that vanished before Claire was born. Nathan had stayed home with Lily. Claire had almost stayed too, wondering whether returning was a mistake. But when the old Switchman's house appeared through the trees, that doubt disappeared. There it is, she said. Everyone stopped. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Grant lowered his camera slowly. My God. They went inside carefully. The stove was still there. The bunks. The height marks by the doorway. The survival instructions carved into the timber. Grant ran his fingers just above the carvings, without touching them. People didn't cut things like this for history, he said. They cut them because somebody might need them. Claire understood that better than anyone. She showed them the hidden drawer, then the empty compartment beneath the floor. Grant photographed everything. Over the following weeks, records began filling in the missing pieces. The Switchman's house had once served a spur line, supporting several mining and timber camps in the mountains. Margaret's husband, Walter, had maintained miles of track. Their children, Thomas and Grace, had grown up beside the line. But the mystery of the missing box remained until Grant called Claire one afternoon. We found someone, he said. His name was Walter Cole. No relation to Margaret's husband, just a shared name. 76 years old. He was Margaret's grandson. Claire met him at the Historical Society. He arrived carrying a battered metal box. The moment she saw it, she knew. He set it gently on the table. I've been looking for that house for years. His mother, Grace, had told him stories about growing up beside the railroad. After the line closed, the family scattered, and the exact location of the house had slowly faded from memory. He had finally tracked it down. And yes, the footprints had been his. So had the clean door latch. Months earlier, worried the roof might collapse, he had removed the metal box from beneath the floor. Inside were photographs, payroll ledgers, railroad badges, maps, and handwritten records of families who had once lived along the line. He hadn't taken a treasure. He'd been trying to save one. Claire reached into her bag. I think these belong with it. She placed Margaret's letters on the table. Walter stared at the handwriting. His face changed. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he touched one envelope with 2 fingers. My mother used to talk about her handwriting, he whispered. His eyes filled. I never thought I'd see it. Claire looked away, giving him the privacy of his tears. She'd spent so much of her life believing strength meant hiding pain. Walter taught her something different that afternoon. Sometimes tears were simply what happened when love had nowhere else to go. Months passed. The Switchman's house was stabilized, with help from the county and local volunteers. The documents were cataloged, and photographs of forgotten railroad families were matched with names. Claire volunteered whenever she could. At first she came because of Margaret. Then she began meeting older residents whose fathers had worked the mines, whose mothers had cooked for rail crews, whose grandparents had lived in communities that no longer appeared on any modern map. They brought photographs, stories, names. Claire listened, and slowly, almost without noticing, she stopped feeling like someone running away. She became part of something. Her own life changed quietly, too. She found work, opened a bank account in her own name, started looking for a small apartment. Lily began sleeping through the night, and she laughed more. That mattered most. One Saturday, Claire brought Lily back to the Switchman's house. Walter was there. He knelt carefully and showed her an old photograph of Grace, standing on that same porch, nearly Lily's age. Lily studied it. She lived here. She did, Walter said. Was she scared? Walter looked toward Claire before answering. Sometimes. Did she get better? He smiled. She grew up. She had a family. And she told us stories about this place for the rest of her life. Lily seemed satisfied. She took Claire's hand. As they stood beside the rusted tracks, Claire finally understood what Margaret had left behind. It wasn't a box. It wasn't even the house. It was the decision to preserve something for people she would never meet. Margaret had protected her children. Walter had protected Margaret's memory. And now Claire was trying to give Lily something worth carrying forward, too. The old spur line had stopped taking people anywhere decades ago. But somehow it had brought all of them together. And for Claire Bennett, the woman who had arrived believing her life was falling apart, it had become the place where she finally began putting it back together. A few months later, Claire and Lily moved into a small apartment of their own. The furniture was secondhand. Boxes still lined the walls. There was nothing impressive about the place, but it was quiet. Not the kind of quiet where Claire once measured every word, or Lily listened for footsteps. This quiet felt safe. One afternoon, Lily taped a drawing above her bed. It showed two people holding hands in front of a little house beneath a crooked yellow sun. Marmalade, the stuffed fox she'd clung to through the storm, sat beside the pillow. Mama. Yes, sweetheart. Are we staying here? Claire looked at her daughter. Yes. For how long? Claire smiled. For as long as it feels like home. Lily nodded, set Marmalade on the bed, and ran off to play. Claire watched her go. That small moment told her everything. More than 60 years earlier, Margaret had left behind words for people she would never meet. She could never have known that one day another frightened mother would find them and finally understand. Strength isn't always holding on. Sometimes it's knowing what you should no longer carry. The old Switchman's house had stopped sheltering travelers decades ago. Yet somehow, on one stormy night, it showed Claire the way forward. In the end, Claire didn't give Lily a perfect home. She gave her something better, a safe one. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy anyone can leave behind. Not teaching our children how much they should endure, but showing them what love, safety, and home should truly feel like. If Claire and Lily's story moved you, let us know in the comments. What does home mean to you? And if you believe stories of courage, second chances, and forgotten places are worth remembering, subscribe and join us for the next one.